Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. American's Moments in Geography. It's been a little while since we've had a new video out, so I want to thank you and welcome back. We're going to get a little bit further this year, which I'm excited about. In this next unit, we're going to talk a little bit about China and its neighbors, but today we're going to focus mostly on China. So let's get started. We're going to get into China's physical geography as well as its economy today. So we're going to be talking about the land of China as well as its markets and other features of its economy. Formally, I do want to say that what we will be referring, the nation we will refer to China, its formal name is the People's Republic of China. And again, that speaks certainly to its political outlook, but also the importance it places on its people. So what we're going to be able to do today, we're going to be able to describe the physical features of China. We're also going to describe how the Chinese economy is different, but also certainly interconnected with the United States. We'll talk a little bit too about how that relationship certainly is kind of a little bit of a two-way street. So let's start with China's physical environment. When we look at China's landscape, again, you're going to see a wide variety of different physical landforms, and I'm going to start with mountains. Mountains make up about a third of the land that we will see, the third of the landscapes that we'll see throughout China. You got the Himalayas, sometimes they're called the Himalaya, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of these, but you've also got the Kunlun Shan, Tian Shan, as well as the Atlay, and certainly all of those mountains, again, are going to bring some resources certainly to China, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the economy. We also have the plateau of Tibet, and Tibet certainly is a region that tends to be a little controversial. You certainly see people like the Dalai Lama who are fighting for Tibet to be an independent nation, whereas certainly you have the Chinese government who sees it as a part of China. So it's already certainly a little bit controversial there as well. Sometimes this is also called the roof of the world. Its average height is about 14,800 feet above sea level, and it certainly feeds into a lot of the rivers of the region, which makes it vitally important, which is why you'll hear people like the Dalai Lama and others talk a little bit about their concerns with the changing in the climate and the melting of glaciers and other activities that may have consequences for the people of these regions, especially if they are affecting the rivers, which again are very important to all human life, but to life in general. You also have the Turpan Depression. Definitely a big change in elevation. You're going to be about 500 below sea level, not 500 feet. It also tends to be quite warm, about 122 degrees. Also an area that has seen some agriculture as well, although you'll see the Manchurian Plains also play a really big role when it comes to feeding people. Just like the physical landforms, the physical features, you're also going to see there's a wide variety of different climates in China. We are talking about a fairly large nation. Certainly in the northernmost points, you're going to get into that subarctic. You're even going to see some areas that are a little bit more of that humid continental. And if you live like we do in Minnesota, you're certainly quite familiar with that particular climate. Also in the north, especially in the parts that border here along with Mongolia, you're going to see that more arid steppe climate. And again, certainly we will see that when we talk about Mongolia a little bit later in this unit. You'll also certainly see that humid continental, those warmer summers, definitely tend to be, a little bit warmer. You're also certainly around the Gobi, especially you're going to see that arid desert-like climate. With the mountains and its changes in elevations, highlands are also going to be there. And then as we get further south, you're going to see that humid subtropical, even the tropical, rainforest-like area in the furthest southern parts of China. So there's a lot of diversity when it comes to the climate of China as well. Now, speaking of deserts, we've got two major deserts in this region. You're going to see the Taklamakan, which tends to be very isolated. You're going to see the sand dunes, and again, the wind's going to kind of create these peak-like shapes that you see classically in deserts. But the big one, of course, is the Gobi. The Gobi Desert is about the size of Texas, and so certainly a region in which it takes a lot of grit, hard work, and a lot of planning in order to live here. But certainly also would have served as a natural barrier to China from invasion, at least from the parts bordering against China throughout its history. When we get to kind of the more of the plains, again, Manchuria is probably, or the Manchurian plain is the one that we're going to be most common with. You're going to find it in northern China. Again, this is where a large amount of your people live. Up to 90% of China's people live here. And this can include urban areas, which we'll talk about in just a second. But certainly along those plains, you'll also see a lot of agriculture taking place here as well. Now, when we think of China, a lot of the times what we think of are these massive cities, these urban areas. And that's fair because you do have, an increasing flood of urbanization into these cities, especially as privatization has started to occur more. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shift, certainly for China in just a moment. But manufacturing is going to be big here, resource rich for sure. This is where a lot of your iron ore and coal go. Again, Chinese steel is exported around the world. Tends to also, compete with different steel industries around the world, including the United States. You're certainly also going to see some of the, the Imperial Palace, along with modern China, modern Beijing, of course, our capital here. Shanghai is also, of course, one of our largest cities. And again, a lot of economic opportunity here. You're definitely seeing that urbanization, especially coupled with the privatization of more governments under communism, which is a big shift for China in recent years. Rivers, again, they feed a lot of life around the world. China is no different. You've got the Yangtze, and again, I apologize if I mispronounce any of these. You've got the Yellow River along with the Xi River. Farmland, again, is going to be, is going to be very important. It's going to be in these fertile alluvial valleys, which you're going to find. Dams and dikes have also been certainly implemented to help against flooding in order to help control water flow. One of the biggest dam projects in the world, but also certainly controversial, especially when it comes to the idea that you've displaced a lot of the people that were living in these valleys now, that are now underwater. That's the Three Gorges Dam. And in my class, we're going to talk a little bit more about why it's controversial, but certainly encourage you to look into that and try to get a sense too of why it was done, why it was such a big project, but also why it has been controversial in recent years as well. Also, certainly earthquakes are a reality in China. We see that, again, you've got the Ring of Fire just to the east. And in this area, you see a lot of geothermal activity occurring, including volcanoes. And we talked a little bit about this, whether it was in Mexico or even in Hawaii. And to certainly a degree when we talked about along the Andes Mountains in South America. And we'll certainly get into it when we talk about Oceania and Southeast Asia as well. But certainly a lot of activity going on here. And again, you're going to see that affecting the physical environment in China itself. For my students in particular, certainly mapping has been an important part of our year. And I do want to make sure that you know in general where these rivers are. So if you're following along with guide notes, draw yourself a little arrow or circle them, but make sure you know where the Yellow, the Yangtze, and the Xi or the Xiang River are. Both the Xi and the Xiang are the same. And so make sure you know where those three are. Those are key geographic points that I want you to make sure that you know. They're also going to be very important to China's history, most definitely. But those three rivers, again, are going to be remaining very important as we move forward. All right, let's talk a little bit about the economy to round things out. So as far as China goes, we know that since 1949, they have been a communist state. We saw the Chinese Revolution occur under Mao, and certainly we saw a lot of violence come with that. We saw a lot of change happen very quickly. But you do have a very long-standing civilization here that it's the oldest permanent civilization in the world. And so certainly there are deep roots when it comes to the culture that was established here. Certainly a lot changed after the Communist Revolution, but certainly you also will still see a lot of the tradition that helps to define China still present as well, outside of that communism. You have seen, and this is where there's those similarities to the United States come, you have seen some of a shift, not entirely, but a little bit, of a shift towards some free enterprise characteristics. One of the things you've seen a little bit more privatization of is farmland. This has helped rural areas out tremendously. There is still, of course, the idea of, the market and control. And again, not saying that everything is privatized and that the government is completely hands off. They're certainly not. But you have seen some shift. And you've also seen some of that privatization flesh out into private companies. And so you have seen quite a bit of economic growth, whether it's in the rural areas with the privatization of agriculture or in the cities with some of the privatization of companies and businesses. You've also seen in recent years, China has tried to promote trade within its economy. And certainly the United States has been a huge part of this. So certainly the investment by foreign corporations, you've seen, companies like Apple have outsourced a lot of their materials. And this is partially why some of the goods that Americans want to consume have been less expensive, is because of this outsourcing, lowering labor costs, which means lower prices on some of those goods that we buy, whether it's iPhones or iPads or, other electronics. You have seen, because of outsourcing, a little bit of a drop in some, or at least a lowering of what those prices could be if they were made in the United States. And there's, again, a huge argument to be made on both of those sides, and that's certainly a topic for a different video. You definitely see there's a large market for these products. Again, a lot of things are going to be made in China, and again, outsourcing is a big part of that. And what some of this privatization has done is improved standard of living. It's not great for all peoples, and certainly we have a lot to talk about when it comes to China's human rights record, but definitely have seen through some of these economic changes, certainly some growth. Last couple things I want to talk about, and again, economically, this has also certainly been a part of the imperialization that occurred in China, but also certainly China changing the power dynamics within the land of itself, but also around it. So again, just to kind of close off that conversation about the United States, both nations very much need each other. China needs, the U.S. to be the buyer. China needs, or the U.S. needs China to be the supplier. The two certainly do. China would definitely have, in my opinion, the advantage in that relationship. But again, they do both definitely need each other. And these two regions I want to talk about, first one is Hong Kong. So Hong Kong previously was controlled by the United Kingdom, and this was true actually until 1997, in which it became an independent entity. Now, when Britain left this region, part of the agreement that they had with China is that it would remain somewhat independent, and that you had a group that was, while ethnically very similar to China, had lived a lifestyle that was maybe a little bit more European. And the UK was hoping that the people could remain semi-autonomous, but you've seen in recent years that China has taken some of that opportunity away from Hong Kong, and in more recent years taken a lot more control of the area, including a little bit of that freedom that the British were hoping would remain there. You also have Macau or Macau, depending again on whether you use kind of the more Western world U or they're a little bit more like the Chinese O. But certainly, again, great example of imperialism here, was controlled by Portugal until 1999, but now it certainly has become a region that is certainly under much more control of the Chinese government. So again, that certainly has been, in the last, we're looking at 23, 24, 25 years ago. So certainly, certainly some changes when it has come to the recent history of China. And again, we could certainly, talk a little bit more, too, about the influence that China has within the region. But again, I think that's a topic for another video. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Hope you have a wonderful day. And until next time, we'll see you on another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography.